Since childhood, Anthony Kiedis was given all kinds of drugs by his father, leading him to experience severe emotional turmoil. Anthony Kiedis developed a well-known psychological condition, the paternal complex. Do you know how Anthony Kiedis overcame the paternal complex and managed to become the lead singer of one of the greatest bands in the world? How does psychology explain his case? You are watching The Dark Side of Stars, and today we will explore the dark side of Anthony Kiedis. Anthony Kiedis was born on November 1, 1962, in the United States. He is the son of Peggy Noble and John Kiedis, who separated when he was 3 years old. From that age on, he would visit California every year to spend time with his father, whom he adored. It wasn't until he was 12 that he moved to Hollywood permanently to live with his father. While John Kiedis worked as an actor under the pseudonym Blackie Dammit, it didn't take long for Anthony to follow in his artistic footsteps. He began taking acting classes and adopted the stage name Cole Dammit, landing small roles, including playing the son of the legendary Sylvester Stallone. But their life together was far from perfect. In reality, Anthony's father had a criminal past and a deep involvement with drugs. John Kiedis was a former inmate and a drug addict, and his primary source of income was drug dealing. Anthony has recalled transporting 7 suitcases full of marijuana across the country with his father, risking arrest. It was also his father who introduced him to drugs for the first time, giving him a marijuana cigarette just 4 days after moving to California. Even more disturbingly, his father went so far as to lend his own wife to Anthony so he could lose his virginity. Yes, he did that. John Kiedis was well connected in Hollywood's artistic scene and was close friends with many celebrities, including Sonny and Cher. Sonny was one of the few positive role models Anthony had at the time. As a child, he would talk to Sonny about respect and honesty. But in the end, there was no escape. Anthony witnessed his father snorting cocaine, taking sleeping pills, and even giving him pills to sleep before going out to parties. It didn't take long for drugs to take over Anthony's life. He began using alongside his father's own friends. In school, he experimented with psychedelics like acid, and by the age of 14, he injected heroin for the first time, marking the start of an increasingly dark path. During this time, Anthony met his soul brother, the bassist Flea. Despite the chaos, Anthony enjoyed school and excelled in English class. While most students would scribble something down in 5 minutes just to finish an assignment, Anthony would spend much more time writing passionately. His teacher often praised him for his gift for writing, but at the time, that was his only talent. Flea was in a band and wanted Anthony to join, but the problem was that Anthony didn't play or sing. What he did have was an outstanding charisma. So Flea put him in charge of introducing the band before their performances. Anthony would go on stage, introduce the band, and then dive into the crowd. Over time, he was drawn deeper into that world. Eventually, they decided to make Anthony the frontman, forming what would become the first lineup of the Red Hot Chili Peppers. The band started gaining recognition in the rock scene and, in 1984, released their first album. Meanwhile, Anthony's drug use escalated even further, now sharing substances with his closest friends Flea and guitarist Hillel Slovak, both original members. But Anthony was spiraling out of control, using much more than his friends, which began to consume his life. While working on the Uplift Mofo party plan, Anthony was fired from the band by the producer. Later, Anthony admitted that he saw himself as arrogant, spoiled, controlling, selfish, and emotionally immature during this period. Drugs made him manipulative and dishonest, and he didn't care about how his actions affected others. His only concern was getting what he wanted. At the height of his addiction, Anthony traded a Rolling Stones autographed guitar to a dealer to pay off drug debts. After hitting rock bottom, he finally realized he needed help. He saw his dismissal from the band as a wake-up call and decided to enter rehab. During this time, the Red Hot Chili Peppers auditioned dozens of vocalists, but couldn't find anyone with Anthony's energy. After about 2 months, Anthony got clean and asked to return. The band welcomed him back. By then, Anthony had quit all drugs, while Flea had never been as heavily involved. However, Slovak continued using large amounts of heroin. In 1988, the band suffered a devastating loss when Hillel Slovak died of a heroin overdose. Anthony was deeply affected and soon after wrote the hit Under the Bridge, inspired by his struggle with loneliness and addiction. Over time, the Red Hot Chili Peppers became one of the most famous bands in the world, selling millions of albums and creating legendary music. Today, at 60 years old, Anthony has embraced sobriety, surfing, vipassana meditation, and fatherhood, finally finding balance in his life. But despite his recovery, Anthony's life was a constant battle. How much of this mental struggle was caused by his father's influence? And how does psychology explain the consequences of a father's past affecting his child's future? Let's analyze the father figure within a child's psyche. The paternal figure has the role of establishing rules and boundaries for the child. Although the mother can also fulfill this function, within the child's psyche, this role is usually represented by the father. As we saw in this story, Anthony experienced the exact opposite of what a father should be, which caused significant harm to his inner world. The psychological impact left on us by either parent is referred to as the paternal or maternal complex in psychology. The experience ingrained in Anthony's psyche was incredibly complicated and led him to a psychological oscillation called enantiodromia. This concept, originally developed by the philosopher Heraclitus and later revived by Carl Jung, represents a compensatory psychic movement, a shift from one extreme to another. Think of pulling back a bowstring. You apply force in one direction, but this automatically generates an opposite force when released. This is exactly what happened to Anthony Kiedis. If there was one positive aspect to this phenomenon, it was that the negative experiences he endured pushed him toward the opposite side, compelling him to find an escape, which, in his case, was creativity. This explains why Anthony Kiedis wrote the majority of the Red Hot Chili Peppers lyrics. However, enantiodromia itself is unhealthy, as it prevents an individual from achieving true psychological integration. One moment, the person is at one extreme, and the next, they swing to the opposite. They experience episodes of depression and euphoria, almost like bipolarity. This is when drugs often become a coping mechanism. As dopaminergic substances, they provide temporary relief, and Anthony also turned to them to escape his inner turmoil. Anthony's story leads us to a clear conclusion. We must protect the mental well-being of our children. A healthy psychological foundation is essential for every human being. Fortunately, our personality holds sovereignty over our fate. That's why, after reaching maturity, Anthony Kiedis made better choices. He chose to heal, to feel good, and to embrace vipassana meditation, which ultimately helped him find his center and integrate the opposing forces that once dominated his youth. Anthony realized how crucial it is to maintain balance throughout life. In the next episode of The Dark Side of the Stars, he didn't just change the history of rock, he defined an entire generation in the 90s. But do you know the mysteries behind Kurt Cobain's tragic fate? And what does psychology really say about what happened to him? Don't miss the next episode of The Dark Side of the Stars.